Last talk of the conference. Sorry? It's all right. So this talk is not what I wanted it to be. When I started writing, when I had the idea for the talk, it was a very different talk. It was also slightly longer, so I'm actually quite a nervous speaker. So I'm actually kind of glad that it's going to be a little shorter. So my talk is called Sweet Ruby, and I actually wanted to do a demonstration, but I couldn't get the stuff together, so I'm just going to show you pictures of how to make Sweet Ruby. So you start with some ruby grapefruit, cut them up, add some sugar, and you have Sweet Ruby. Thank you. So I started to get the idea for this talk, and as I said, it's not the talk that I had the idea for, when I saw the documentation for Ruby for the instance variable set method. And the documentation is this. And this is the part I really like. Let me read it. Sets the instance variable names by symbol to object, thereby frustrating the efforts of the class's author to attempt to provide proper encapsulation. So, and that's still in the Ruby dot. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Sweet Ruby, about how we use things like syntactic sugar, how we write DSLs and things like that, and how really, really simple it is. Because I think sometimes we forget. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is class methods, because we actually use them a lot. So for example, we have here a class grapefruit, and it defines this method phasers. And later on, in your class definition, you can say phasers true. And it's as simple as that. The thing is that that's not very useful to have these class methods in the class you're actually working with. But we have a good mechanism for bringing in existing functionality, and that's inheritance. So we might create a base class that has a method called beats, and it sets the number of beats. And then we would inherit base of from the base class and be able to set the tempo. And we see this kind of thing in our Rails applications all the time. So we might have a heavy controller inheriting from a metal controller, which has a before filter, and that's exactly a class method that's being called there. Or we might have a song which is an active record, and it has one artist, and it delegates the full name method to the artist. And these are class methods that are being called, and they're being inherited from those base classes. So here's another example. This I've actually done in our code base. You have a class called artist, and add to that a can method. And you might use this for setting up roles or permissions or anything like that. And the can method actually just takes this hash and turns it into stuff that the class can do. So it defines a new method, or meta-programming here. So for example, white zombie can rock, but they can't dance. And if you inherit it from white zombie, maybe baby metal, they can dance and they can rock. And if we actually run this code, you'll see that it's created a method called can rock, and it returns true. can dance, false. Can rock, true. Can dance, true. So if we look at that method, this is the meta-programming, this is the core of the method. It's actually defining a new method, and it's using class email to do that. So effectively, this would be the same as writing that, except that the first one is just so much nicer to read, it's so much easier, it's nicer on the eyes. And I think that's pretty sweet. If we look here again, we see that we're actually interpolating the permission into the method that's defined, which means we can pass code. And if we had an age method or an age attribute, then white zombie could drink, but maybe baby mental can't. So instance methods are pretty much the same thing. You have a new base class, let's call it n-base, for argument's sake. And what's really nice about this pattern that over here is that you might, in a particular instance, want to change the beat. You've gotten to a certain part of the song. But just for that, so save the old value, set the new one, and yield out, and you pass in a block, and ensure at the end so that you can set back the value. And if you inherit that, you now have drum and bass with a default beat of 150, and during the drop it goes up to 180. You might want to do both class or instance methods, and that's really where we have modules. So this is quite a useful little module, retrieval. We know the internet breaks all the time, and the fix is to try again. So really, with this module, it just wraps a nice little retries method and tries everything 3 times before raising the error. So we might have Ninja, who's an artist, and we include the retriable, so when he shows off, he can try stage diving 3 times. Or we might extend it in an artist worker, for example, rescue, so that it's a class method there, and we can retry getting off stage. And now I'm going to have a little interlude. So when I was putting the slides together for this, I wanted to put cool pictures on all the slides, but it actually looked pretty shit. So I've just stuck them in the middle here. So apparently there was actually a band called Grapefruit back in the early 70s, and the reason that I had phasers as the method there is because they used voice phasers in their music. This is Ace of Base. Here we have Rob Zombie of White Zombie, and I think we can all agree that he probably can't dance. He can definitely rock though. And over here is Baby Metal. And if you haven't heard any Baby Metal, you must. Just search for it on YouTube. It's crazy stuff. And this apparently is a zombie cocktail, which might be what Rob Zombie drinks. And finally, this is a band called Pendulum, which is a drum and bass band. So, just for completeness sake. Oh wait, there's one more. Here we have Ninja from Die Antwoord, and he's Zeph. Moving on, interlude over, deconstructing sweetness. So we use all sorts of syntactic sugar in our Ruby code all the time. And one example is plus equals. Ruby doesn't actually have a plus equals method. You can't define a plus equals method. If you have plus and you have equals, this is syntactic sugar. Am I right, Aaron? So that actually becomes encore equals encore plus 1. And actually, that is sending the plus message to encore with a value of 1, which is actually this. And if you're a library author, you probably want to use underscore, underscore, send, underscore, underscore, because send is quite a common word and sometimes overwritten by bad people. When we define methods, we get symbol returned. And if you use define method, you also get symbol returned. And what I'm trying to get at here is that there's two different ways of doing the same thing. And when you start thinking about having these two different ways of doing the same thing, you might find code that you can extract, like the can method, for example, which makes your code neater. Classes are a little different. So if we look for a constant in the module, we won't find it. When we define the class and we look again, so the class itself doesn't return a value, but what it does do is sets a constant, which is pointing to the instance of that class. So now we have a sound error class. And that's basically what we're doing over here. And by the way, I prefer this way of defining new standard errors over the other way with semicolons and ugly stuff in it. This just looks much nicer. So Ruby's got a ton of these meta-programming methods, and they're built right into the language. And there's basic evaluation methods, variable methods, methods for defining methods, classes, undefining methods. I didn't know about the undef and the remove method until I just looked these up. And then we have include and extend, and we have two events, included and extended. So again, the point of this is that, you know, when you have all this stuff that you can do in more than one way, then you might find a way of extracting. And I actually had the thought, you know, maybe Ruby actually does this, that it actually rewrites class, whatever, you know, and becomes class.new. But the short answer is no, it doesn't. And I imagine that the main reason is that because when you have these syntactic sugar helpers and that kind of thing, that you can actually optimize around those. The Seattle RB group has some very, very cool stuff on their GitHub page, and one of the things is Ruby parser. So that allowed me to have a look at what code Ruby actually constructs. So I wrote a very simple class without sugar that has a method that we can add a number of teaspoons of sugar and it calculates the calories, which it turns out is 16 per teaspoon apparently. And this was written using class.new and define method, and this is the AST that I got out of it. And then I did the same thing with the standard method of writing a class, and define, and this is the AST that I got. And you can see the AST for the standard method is actually quite a lot shorter, so there's definitely some optimization. So what's the point? The point is that if you sometimes looking at your code and being able to extract methods and do these kinds of things and make your code more readable, I think that's a great bonus. And knowing these techniques for being able to meta-program, and it's easy. This is not hard stuff. This is stuff we all know how to do. But sometimes we just leave 100 methods in our class when we could have actually just meta-programmed those 100 methods into the class. Thank you.
No come electro por la vida.